I can hear you.
That's good.
I have got a little microphone, luckily, on me.
Good. I don't.
You sound fine, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean.
Sound great, better than fine.
That's great. Who would know? We're in the show, it says.
Oh, are we live? Hello, world.
Are we live? I guess we're live. It says live. I don't think anyone's watching yet.
Are we able to see which of the Middle East Eye audiences are tuning in? Are we able to see comments as well?
I have no idea. You have to ask your man. Ideally, we should have had an hour extra so that we could have done this half an hour ago, and you could have had 15 minutes more to script, and then we could have done this, what we're doing now, at 11:40. I think David Hurst is in the. He's in the thing. He's just not yet in the. Yaman, where are you? Why aren't you in this thing?
I'm here.
Oh,
hello. Hi, David.
Hello.
Yeah, where's Yaman? Yaman needs to count us down and tell us what's happening. Yaman. David, thanks for your time. This it's really.
No. Don't worry. I think we've.
Okay, we're live, I think.
Oh, we are.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're live.
Right, it's midday. So, for anyone watching, welcome to Middle East Eye. We've just begun our live special coverage of the strikes on Iran. To update you, the US and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran shortly after 9:30 a.m. local time. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the objective was regime change, while US President Donald Trump has called on Iranians to rise up and take control of their government. The joint strikes targeted government and military sites across the country. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has reportedly been moved to a secure location. Now, nearly an hour after the strikes began, Iran launched retaliatory rocket attacks. Explosions were heard across Israel, including in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, as air defense systems responded to incoming projectiles. Iran also targeted US military bases in the region, with strikes reported in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Manama, Doha, and Kuwait. Blasts were also heard in the Jordanian capital, Amman. Now, our first guest today is our editor-in-chief, David Hurst. The thing is, Washington has been ramping up pressure on Tehran to agree to a new deal on its nuclear program. This nuclear program has been at the center of Trump's rhetoric on the attacks. Trump said on Friday that he was not happy with Iran's negotiating position. However, speaking on CBS late last night, the Omani foreign minister revealed that crucial progress had been made in the agreement just before the strike. Let's hear what he had to say. I'm not sure if we have that clip ready to play. If that comes available, we will get to it. But David, I'm sure you're familiar that these developments have been made just as the US was apparently preparing for these attacks. So tell us, why is this strike happening now? And what are your reflections on that dynamic over the nuclear agreement?
Well, this attack makes no sense if the issue is Iran's nuclear enrichment program. Donald Trump claimed to have obliterated the program in the 12 days of strikes in June last year. And now his envoy, Steve Witkoff, was claiming that Iran was 1 week away from getting bomb-made material. So which is it? Both statements can't be true. I mean, the truth is that most of the uranium enrichment centrifuges were buried by the bombing last year. And that's according to US intelligence. And Iran has not made efforts to recover either the centrifuges or the highly enriched uranium. That's the stuff that's enriched to over 60%. And that's what's called bomb-grade material. It's actually not bomb-grade material because that goes up to 90%. But that's the stuff that worries people. And besides that, as you just said, the Omani foreign minister, Badr bin Hamad al-Busaidi, who was, is not just a foreign minister mouthing off, he is one of the key negotiators the key negotiator in the talks taking place in Oman. He said that Iran had made a very substantial offer, something they hadn't done before. And that was they offered to hand over all their HEU, their highly enriched uranium. So if the nuclear enrichment program really is the issue, that offer should be enough for a breakthrough, the sort of breakthrough that Trump could claim would be enough to stand down his huge armada. But they just ignored it. So what I think really happened was that this talks process was going on while the USS Ford was shuffling towards Haifa, and while they were getting all their missiles in place, and they were simply stalling Iran, as they did the last time with the talks. So I don't think this can now be said to be an attack, anything to do with the uranium enrichment. It's about regime change.
There's a likeness here, and you pointed it out in your recent opinion piece at Middle East Eye, to the weapons of mass destruction narrative that lay behind the Iraq war. And this also comes at a time when Congress within the US was moving to block Trump's strikes on Iran. And now today, this morning, this has happened. What does this all tell us about the dynamic within the USA, the political dynamic within the USA, Trump's power, the checks and balances in place, and really who is pulling the strings behind this attack?
Well, there are none. I think we're in a really, really dangerous state. If I was China, I'd be extremely worried by the way these decisions are made. There's no collective decision making. Both Donald Trump and also Vladimir Putin, before his invasion of Ukraine, closed themselves off from reality and surrounded themselves with the circles of sycophants who are vying with each other to be more hardline. So Trump wasn't actually getting the sort of information that we're putting out, or has absolutely no concept of how this will happen. He had a briefing from his own chief of staff, General Kane, who said, according to the New York Times, look, we can only keep this up for a short or medium time. We simply don't have the missiles for a long term. There could be substantial US casualties because we can't protect all the targets that Iran has, because the US has tens of thousands of troops in the region dotted around in all sorts of bits. They can't protect all these bases with Arrow missiles, and we will quickly deplete our own stockpile of air defense missiles, which are much more sophisticated and much more difficult to produce, apparently, than the cheaper missiles that Iran is throwing up. So Trump translated this briefing into, Kane told me this conflict will be easily won. I mean, there's a complete mismatch between what Kane actually said, or was reported to have said by the New York Times, and actually how Trump translated it. That's dangerous. Trump actually boasted that he's going to make the final decision, that it's all him.
You said that would really worry China. We haven't heard much talk of China. China is a supporter of Iran, but has been fairly quiet on this one. Do you see China stepping out of the woodwork?
Well, we had a very good column saying the opposite, saying that it's dangerous to assume that China's it's not going to send troops, and it's certainly not going to send aircraft, because it's reserving that confrontation, the physical, kinetic confrontation, for Trump. It's reserving the confrontation with the US for Taiwan.
Right, for Taiwan.
But we know it's already sent attack drones. There was a very it was quite performative, but a Chinese military attaché presented an Iranian Air Force commander with a model of a Chinese J-20 stealth fighter on Iran Air Force Day. Again, that was a warning of what they could do. And according to our best information, China isn't. It's a mistake to mistake inaction for passivity. There is action below the table, and we've also reported that they have supplied Iran with the batteries for air defense missiles. How vulnerable they are, how Whether they'll be taken out as soon as they light up, or they light the American planes up, we don't know. We know that this is the biggest attack on Iran that America has actually launched.
Really sounds like this could blow out of proportion. Ashfaq, I believe, yeah, you have some questions for David.
David, I mean, you sort of alluded earlier on to sort of game plans and war plans, games being played by Trump. What do you think Trump's plan is here, and how much of a lead do you think he's taking from Israel? And what do you think this means? Also, especially given Iran's response, it's retaliated against lots of its neighbors. What does all of that mean?
Well, I think Trump's rhetoric has changed quite notably. Last year, he just wanted a very limited strike, and he even rebuked Israel and Netanyahu for carrying on bombing after he'd called an end after the 12th day. He now appears to have changed completely, and he's adopted some of the language of that George W. Bush did to justify the 2003 Iraq war invasion. Like Bush, he's saying that Iran's missiles are an imminent threat to America. He's saying that they're developing long-range missiles. Well, this is news to me, or indeed anyone looking around. They're years away from that, so he's saying, he's using. Bush did the same thing that Saddam Hussein was an imminent threat. He had WMD that actually threatened America, but this is completely hollow talk. What are his plans? I think he's been not so gently, but completely maneuvered by Netanyahu into a position where he couldn't do anything else. And he assembled this huge attack force, and generally when one does that, he uses it. Does he have plans? I think there is a long-term plan, which no one has actually spelt out, but it's an Israeli plan to change the region by knocking out the Iranian regime. Netanyahu hinted at this when he talked about a hexagon of states that would be a new axis, a power axis for the region, and that possibly would start with Iran and go all the way through the region. But those are very vague plans as yet. But opposition Israeli politicians who are reacting, by the way, to this attack with euphoria, are talking about in open terms about a greater Israel. So I think what we've seen, the pattern that we've seen after Gaza, whereby South Lebanon is permanently disabled and still actually occupied by 5 Israeli posts. Syria is occupied, southern Syria is occupied in an area greater than Gaza by Israeli troops. That is just, I think now, the first footsteps of a plan that will unfold if this attack succeeds. The object of the attack is, according to Barak Ravid, who's just posted a piece having talked to an Israeli official, is to create the conditions for regime change. But if you compare, firstly, if you compare this to Iraq was a disaster, and it created 7 years of war. But there's much more preparation pre the attack for regime change. We know how bad that went, and how quickly that dissolved into a civil war. But there were preparations, and there were ground troops invading Iraq. This time, all they've got are missiles and bombs and drones. They've got no government prepared, and there's no realistic possibility of that. That would actually suit Israel. Chaos would suit Israel's and Netanyahu's interest.
It is actually quite hard, like when you lay it out like that, though, it is quite hard to see what is in this for Trump. I mean, his base does not support a forever war. He's been talking about Nobel Peace Prizes, Board of Peace. Obviously, his actions are quite different. The actions we're seeing now, they are quite a stark contrast to Trump's sharp rebuke of Netanyahu after the June war when Israel continued bombing Iran. So am I getting it straight that you really think that Israel is behind this? And in which case, how will Netanyahu have persuaded Trump to do this in your mind?
I think Trump could be persuaded of a quick win, of a repetition of Venezuela, which for him was a stunning success, of capitulation. But I see no signs that Iran is prepared to wave a white flag here, because they know it's a very, very different country from Venezuela, and the power structure is very different, and the ideology is different, and they've been prepared for this, both ideologically and also it's a very big country. It's 90 million people.
David, go for it. I mean, sorry to cut you off. Just
Sorry. So to answer your question, Matilda, I think the only way this works for Trump is if the Iranian regime folds quickly. I mean, quickly, within a matter of weeks. The Iranian response is the long game, and to wear out the missiles, to just keep on firing, and to keep a steady flow, and have and the longer this war goes on, with no regime change, the more the dynamics will change. But the two are fighting very, very different wars. America is fighting an extremely violent, kinetic war, which is based on shock and awe, and which is based on immediate results, and is based on decapitation.
David Hurst.
The Iranians are fighting the long war.
David Hurst, Editor-in-Chief of Middle East Eye, thank you so much for joining us right now.
Thank you.
Now, our next guest lined up is Andreas Krieg, who is a Middle East expert and Professor of Defense Study. Andreas, thank you so much for joining us. He's just tuning in. Ashfaq, take it away.
Andreas, thanks for joining us. I spoke to you about a month ago, maybe it was a bit longer, about the possibility and likelihood of the US actually doing this. At the time, you mentioned that the way you envisioned this was that the US strategy was actually to get the IRGC to maybe try to put pressure on Khamenei to actually leave. Can you walk us through what that thinking was, and do you think that's still the plan?
It's very difficult to ascertain this afternoon, this morning, where the thinking actually is. I don't think the Trump administration has a strategy. The courses of action presented to the president have changed all the time, and also none of them were optimal enough for Trump to sign them off. When we discussed this a month ago, we were in a situation where Trump was about to strike, and then he clearly was convinced not to, not just by the Gulf states, but also because internally people have said this is not going to be easy and you're unlikely going to succeed. And so if, you know, what he's trying to do now, big question mark, considering also in the interim, since January, we've had a fairly successful mediation process where the Omanis have really brought it to the next level. There's been support from the Arab world, from the Gulf, from Turkey for this. And the Iranians, for the first time, have really been willing and able to make concessions. So everything very positive. And so for a period of time, it seemed very unlikely that Trump would go forward with this. And now he clearly has been convinced to do that. Nobody knows what the strategy is. I mean, he's talking about regime change, but that's with Trump, most of the stuff is narrative. And as someone said, you know, with Trump, you shouldn't take him literal, but you have to take him seriously. And we have to take him seriously, but maybe not literal on the regime change bit, because that's absolutely not a feasible and achievable strategy. But what we can talk about is maybe he's trying to create so much pressure to instigate a change on the top, which would mean the IRGC taking over. What the Israelis want, on the other hand, is kind of dividing the elite between the different theocratic movements, creating an uprising domestically, kind of a comprehensive opposition movement, potentially even armed against the regime, and also trying to divide and rule the IRGC and the security sector, because you would need some sort of elite fragmentation for there to be actually a transformation or a toppling or a change in the regime, if you will. And that is very difficult to achieve. There doesn't seem to be a sign this is happening, but also we haven't had a confirmation yet of who the Israelis were able to strike and whether they've been successful in killing sort of strategic leaders in Iran on the ground.
Andres, the Iranian response has been quite broad. They've fired projectiles and drones and a bunch of bombs at Qatar, at Bahrain. Qatar obviously is often a negotiator and a go-between between Iran and its enemies or its foes in the West. Also Jordan, a bunch of others. Walk us through that thinking. Why is Iran doing this? What are they trying to? Why are they drawing these Arab nations into it? Why do they do this? Why are they behaving in this manner?
It's a very dangerous game for the Iranians to play as well. Clearly, most of the Gulf states, and I would even say, well, maybe with the exception of Abu Dhabi, see Israel as the greater threat to regional stability than Iran. However, Iran now striking, and it's not just been, the sort of attacks we've seen against Qatar in June, which were carefully maneuvered, orchestrated, telegraphed. We've seen a couple of waves of strikes hitting, in Bahrain, hitting Dubai, hitting Abu Dhabi, hitting Qatar. We've seen plumes of smoke coming up in Kuwait. So across 4 countries of the GCC, except for Saudi and Oman. That is unprecedented. It clearly also for the Gulf states brings at home this deep-seated fear that Iran could eventually escalate. For 40 odd years, nearly 50 years, the GCC states have been waiting for this, and now it's finally happening, and so certainly not of their own doing. And also Iran will say we're not striking the GCC states, but we're striking the US bases because that's where the threat to us emanates from. But it doesn't work that way. First of all, the Iranians don't have precision strike capability, so even if they're trying to strike US bases in the region, they will most likely always hit something else. We've seen it this morning. Apparently in the UAE, some casualties were some people died, and also it's also for the Iranian regime to show we're going all out. The gloves are off. We're not waiting and seeing. We're not going to be the frog that's been slowly boiled, as was the case with Hezbollah. Israel and Hezbollah standoff for a long time was a bit. Hezbollah was hesitant to get involved. Iran for a long time was hesitant to get involved. And then Israel always being on the offensive. Now Iran says we have to go all out. We have to make it very clear this is existential for us. And we will use all means necessary to defend ourselves. And that means, unfortunately, hitting the Gulf states. But as I said, it's a very, very it's on the knife's edge and a very, very tightrope walk, if you will, because if you escalate too much, you're risking rallying the Gulf states around to kind of disentangling themselves from Iran, which is obviously not in Iran's interest.
Okay, so I mean, it's clear that part of the strategy is for the Gulf states to kind of get the US to say, hey, we don't want to go into this war. This is quite bad, and so it's escalating pressure on that. And you mentioned they're walking this tight edge. What other options do the Arab states have? I mean, and do you think there's some back channeling going on between the Iranians and the Arab states? Because there was previously with the Israelis. What do you think is happening there in the background?
Most certainly, Qatar and Oman will try to keep the back channels open. At the moment, I think it's a very messy situation. Messy in the way that the Iranians have prepared for this war is by delegating command and control to the local level and let them basically get on with it, including missile strikes are coordinated on the local operational tactical level. Because on the strategic level, we still, too much fog of war. We don't really know what happened. I think it will be difficult. Same thing. I mean, Qatar in particular will have to tackle with a response to these attacks from Iran. I think today will be a difficult time to maintain that open channel of communication, but they will certainly try. Oman and Qatar this morning were talking to one another, already coordinating, saying, what can we do? What's the next move to kind of go back from full-out escalation and return to some sort of negotiation? I don't think people are hopeful in Oman or Qatar this morning that something will be around the corner as it was in June, where the attack by the US could be easily translated into a diplomatic off-ramp. I think we're not at this stage because the Iranians now will have to show strength, and it would look like a surrender if they were to return immediately to the negotiation table. But again, it all depends on what the US is going to do, what they're doing today, and what signals they're sending And Trump has been sending all kinds of signals. That's the problem with his administration. He's so inconsistent with this.
Okay, earlier, just before the actual attacks happened, the Omani foreign minister had a few things to say. We'll just play that clip out now so we can get some context to that.
Enriched material, the things that could be used as nuclear fuel for a bomb, you're saying Iran would not keep on their own soil?
They would give it up.
They would give it up?
They will not be able to actually accumulate that material that will enable them to create a bomb. There's no accumulation. So there will be zero accumulation, zero stockpiling, and full verification. That is also equally important achievement, I think. A full and comprehensive verification by the IAEA, which is the agency in charge of this file.
The UN nuclear watchdog.
That's
So
right.
you're saying all enriched material would be shipped someplace else, not Russia, but...
No. The current stockpiles that still exist.
The things that are still in Iran.
I think that there is agreement now that this will be down-blended to the lowest level possible,
Okay.
to a neutral level, a natural level, which means, and converted into fuel, and that fuel will be irreversible.
Okay, Andreas, when we spoke a month ago, you mentioned that, and I asked you what's on the negotiating table, and you mentioned that you think the Iranians would be willing to give up nukes, but you said, the Trump administration will also probably want them to give up ballistic missiles, and that would be probably very, very difficult for them to give up, because if they do that, then what defense do they have? I mean, this is crazy to ask a nation not to have ballistic missiles. So, what do you think? Do you think that was what broke the camel's back? And what, do you think that's still on the table? What do you think happened exactly?
So the discussion in Oman started a few weeks ago was always about the nuclear deal and not the nuclear issue. And the Iranians were very helpful, and they've been forthcoming. They're willing to make concessions. They had the buy-in and the green flag to go ahead from the supreme leader, from the National Security Council, and made it very clear that they're willing to discuss everything related to the nuclear program. What they said from the beginning is the missile issue was off the table, axis of resistance was off the table. The idea was that from Oman and Qatar was, let's try to create consensus on the nuclear issue, bring the Americans around to this, get a slightly better deal than the JCPOA that we had and that Trump ripped apart, and create a situation where Iran is willing to, like the Omani foreign minister said, eliminating all the stockpiles, which was a key concern, having all kinds of inspections from the IAEA, but also potentially from US inspectors on the ground, and also getting rid of all sunset clauses, which was another sort of problem in JCPOA 1.0. So that all seemed very good. And it seems also that Witkoff and Kushner, for a long period, were on board of this sort of approach, and then leaving the issue of missiles to a later stage, second stage of the negotiation. And for a long time, that seemed to have worked out until Netanyahu obviously made it very clear, said, we will not accept, because for Israel, again, the window of striking and changing the regime was closing and has been closing again. Negotiation for Israel always means survival of the regime. Survival of the regime is unacceptable for Netanyahu in particular. So he said to Trump, if you want, if you're not going to do anything about the missiles, and if Iran is not willing to discuss the missiles, we will go in, and then you will be dragged into this war. And so Trump knew, he couldn't tell Netanyahu not to do it. So they had to come up with some sort of understanding that if Iran is unwilling to budge on issues such as missiles, something would have to happen. And this is exactly what happened now. And I would say that it was ultimately Israel that has dragged America and America first back into a neoconservative approach to regional security.
I mean, it's been interesting because ever since October 7th, there's been a dance between, is Israel in charge, is America in charge of sort of dragging the USA back into the region. And again, a month ago when there was supposed to be a strike and it didn't, we kind of felt that maybe the Saudis and the Qataris and everyone in the axis of sort of the Arab states that's not part of Abu Dhabi was kind of convincing Trump. Do you think they still have there's still some chance that they'll be able to bring them back and kind of, it seems like this part of the big Cold War between Israel and the UAE on one side and the Arab states is whether and how they attack Iran. Do you think that's now done, or do you think they can still sort of bring Trump and Trump specifically, not Israel, to be like, hey, let's go slower and more reasonable on Iran, and let's still work to get them to give up some missiles, etc. But let's keep an all-out war at bay.
No, Trump has made it very clear time and again that he prefers diplomacy, and we should disregard some of the stuff he said this morning, where he was saying it's all about regime change. I think it is about the nuclear issue. That can be. We were nearing a breakthrough, as the Omani foreign minister was saying. The missile issue, now degradation on the ground right now, so that the missile program, which is what the Americans are focusing upon, would give Trump an off-ramp to say, look, I destroyed the missile program. We obliterated, as he said, the nuclear program. We are now ready to get a deal, because that now Israel will be comfortable, we'll be comfortable. But my issue is not thinking that Saudi, Qatar, and Oman would get the Trump administration back on board. My concern is, are they able to get the Iranians back to the table? Because there's absolutely no trust. There has been no trust. And whatever little trust they were able to build since January has been now entirely destroyed this morning. So that is going to be much more difficult to create, unless the Iranians feel they're about to collapse, which I agree with David. This is not the sort of regime that has been built to collapse and decapitate and sort of give way to regime change just like this. So if they're digging in now and they can sustain it and they can play for time, I think time is on Iran's side, not on America's side. America, as it stands now, that military posture is already unsustainable for the long run. After a few weeks, they will find it very difficult to supply the carriers with munitions. And obviously they'll be ever more heavily relying on Israel and Israeli bases to strike back, because they don't have the freedom of maneuver over the Gulf and in other areas, in other airspaces to operate in. So it's not a very permissive environment. So I think time plays on the side of the Iranians, and it's getting the Iranians back to the negotiation table that's going to be very challenging.
Andreas Krieg, thank you so much for your time on the Saturday morning. And let's hope things don't escalate.
Let's hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're about to be joined by Daniel Levy, who is president of the US Middle East Project. I think what we'd really love to get your view on is that quote we just heard from the Omani foreign minister. Donald Trump is saying that this strike is justified. It's not just a strike. This rapid offensive is justified by the threat of nuclear weapons development in Iran. But we have just heard from the Omani foreign minister that actually diplomatic negotiations are making good headway. So why are these strikes happening now?
Well, I think we have to take very seriously the idea that, yet again, negotiations were a distraction, were a decoy, were a ruse, diplomacy as a ruse for war. That's what we saw in August. Another round of negotiations was about to happen when the Israeli strike began, clearly in coordination with the Americans. This time, it is a joint strike. So you look at the position of the Omanis, you look at the position of the other mediators, and what America has done is basically embarrassed and demeaned its regional allies, setting them up for what is very clearly a very premeditated. This has nothing to do with the talks being stuck. Let's be very clear. The idea that America could not get an Iranian commitment to not pursue a nuclear weapon is for the birds. It's absolute bunkum.
I mean, we have to remember that Donald Trump, tore up a previous nuclear arrangement in that discussion as well.
Exactly. The one thing that there has been Iranian clarity on throughout is the declaration, the commitment not to pursue a nuclear weapon. Now, you may not want to take that at face value, but that's why there's been such an intense regime of verification and oversight. And let's also be very clear what happened here. 2 nuclear-armed states attacked a non-nuclear armed state on the premise that it might be trying to pursue nuclear weapons.
Daniel, I'm sorry, I'm just having a sound issue and I'm trying to work out if
I can't hear you, Matilda.
Okay, I think we just lost your sound, but it seems to be working again, and I'm really sorry to make you repeat yourself. But as you made it very clear, okay, that in your mind this has nothing to do with nuclear threat, and you have pointed out that you have two nuclear states attacking a non-nuclear state. So then, what is the game plan here, right? And is it US's game plan? Is it Israel's game plan? Is this really in the interests of both countries? And of course, I guess there's the question we have to ask, which is this in the interest of the Iranian people? Because that's the other framing. But maybe we'll get to that after. Just tell us what you think the game plan is here.
Well, I think that is quite transparent on the part of those who are driving this war. And those who are driving this war are the Israelis, their neoconservative hawkish allies in the US, perhaps their Abraham Accords allies in the region. This is hard to argue as an American national interest. You can make the case that an Israel seeking regional domination, an Israel seeking an even more permissive environment in which to pursue its eradicationist agenda against the Palestinians and in which to assert its absolute hegemony. You can make the case, and it's the case that the Israelis are making internally and to each other in their leadership, that if that's Israel's plan, it serves Iran. Sorry, it serves Israel. But you really hard push to make the case that this is a US interest. It's very clear that this was launched after the USS Gerald Ford battleship carrier arrived off the coast of Israel. So we also now have, if we needed it, even greater clarity that Israel is absolutely dependent as a protectorate of the US. And yet, here it is, Israel driving the traffic, Israel playing very fast and loose with American lives and lucre, with American willingness to deploy, I would argue, at Israel's behest. This is not going to play well, I would suggest, domestically in the US. But if you ask what it's trying to achieve, Trump is easy to dupe, I think we can say. And therefore, he may believe fairy tale stories of regime change in Tehran. I don't think the Israelis believe that's going to be the case, that you crown the old Shahist dynasty and you bring them back. What the Israelis are interested in is regime collapse and state chaos, state collapse. Why? You remove a challenge to Israel. You further shift the balance of deterrence in the region. You will have the neighborhood of Iran, the immediate neighborhood, dealing with the spillover consequences of an Iran brought to ruins, of a chaotic state collapse reality in Iran. So that will impact the Gulf, Turkey, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, who are having their own little ding-dong at the moment, simultaneously to this. And why is that in Israel's interest as Israel sees it? This is the path to making the case to the rest of the region, bend the knee, accept that we are America and us and America cannot be defeated or challenged. So get on board, shut up when it comes to what we're doing to the Palestinians, and accept our domination. I would argue that is a high stakes gamble, because not only is there a question as to the durability of America staying in the game on this military strike, this military campaign, not only is there a question of domestic political pushback in an America in which Israel is already not nearly as popular, not nearly as supported as it was. Not only is there the question of Israel's own resilience, Israel exposed, Israel has a lower pain threshold. Can Israel sustain this? But there is also what I would suggest is the biggest strategic gamble Israel is taking, which is it is doubling down and intensifying a campaign that as a small settler colonial state in this region, you are attempting to humiliate the entire region. time and time again. That to me is high stakes, high risk, and I'm not sure it pays off for them.
I mean, this picture that you are painting, this is
I
a
can't
very
hear
scary
you.
scenario. You can't hear me now.
Daniel, can you hear me?
Can you hear me or can you hear Ashfaq?
Okay, we can't hear Daniel, but in the meantime, Matilda, we can bring on Tamara, who is part of our team and can discuss things. Just to come back off Daniel, we try to fix Daniel's issues. For now, we'll just probably get him off screen. Daniel, can you hear us now?
One more try with Daniel. Can you hear us?
I think Daniel still can't hear us. Let's bring Tamara on, and maybe there's more updates that she has for us.
That's a shame. Yeah. No, I mean the situation that Daniel paints. Tamara, hello. The situation Daniel's just painted for us. It's a very scary picture for the whole region, but it's a very scary situation for people in Iran. And I think it would be great just to get an understanding of what is happening in Iran right now and what people in the country are having to deal with.
So we've had strikes across several cities in Iran. The latest reports are that a girls' elementary school was hit, Minab Girls Elementary School, and you have projected deaths to be in the dozens. I'm just seeing on my screen here, smoke billowing, charred vehicles, charred buildings. So quite chaotic scenes. Obviously, the messaging thus far has been that the US and Israel are striking military sites as well as the residences of senior officials. So New York Times had satellite imagery of the compound of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and his compound looked to have been targeted. The compound of the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, also targeted, as well as senior figures on the Defense Council and National Security Council. So you've had this kind of dual track where the US has focused on the missiles and the strategic sites, and Israel has focused on kind of leaders and political targets. But I think this strike on a school, if these reports are true, that you've had dozens of potentially children killed, again, death toll still unconfirmed, this would be really shocking and kind of a new step in their attack in these waves of strikes.
Thanks, Tamara. I think Daniel's back. Daniel, is your sound working now?
It is. I apologize. I don't know what happened.
No worries. It's the bogies on the internet. Matilda, you were asking Daniel something?
Yeah, Daniel, I just wanted to.
Oh, I can't hear Matilda.
Okay,
okay, it's fine. I'll speak to you, Daniel. You were painting us a bleak picture about sort of Israel's plan, and we've heard many analysts say this, that they sort of want regime collapse, and that will create a lot of collapse in the region. Obviously, I can't see any actor in any state in the whole region, with the exception of Israel and possibly the Emirates, it's not. I mean, even the Emirates are kind of on the fence with wanting the extent of collapse. That will impact them as well. It's a country which geographically is very close to Iran, so collapse will impact them as well. So, what can the region as a whole, and Iran is part of this, obviously, do to kind of withhold or ensure that restrain the USA from ensuring that going ahead and following Netanyahu's lead and making sure Iranian collapse can occur or will occur?
Well, to the extent to which, and I think it is the case, that the region did not want today's development, that they were trying to lean in with Washington, to the extent to which they tried, they didn't succeed, clearly. Look, let's be clear. We had the meeting just last week of Board of Peace Incorporated, its inaugural meeting chaired by the great peacemaker, Donald Trump, and they all showed up. So is the strategy working? I think we have a very clear answer. The question as of the early hours of this morning is what message is now being communicated and with what intensity? And is there any kind of this will change our fundamental relationship? There's tremendous leverage that the region potentially could bring to the table, whether that's on the Palestine question and the genocide that we saw on our screens and went through for 2.5 years, or whether it comes to today. We have seen an Iranian response in the region, as was broadcast and communicated by Iran in advance. And one of the questions is, are you going to see the region intensely now saying to the Americans, You had your fun. We can't sustain this. Our airspace is closed. Commercially, we're being hit. We are now paying the cost for being your ally, for being in your bases, because you've gone with your radical, destabilizing, warmongering ally. Who's in charge, you or them? And if you're in charge, desist and make sure that they desist, because this doesn't work for us. You can have your victory narrative. Mr. Trump, you said we're doing more than we did last time. You've already done more. You said it's up to the Iranian people now. Rest on that narrative. If that's what the regional leaders do, is that going to be knocking on an open door? Or is it going to meet resistance? Or is the regional position going to, from some at least, be, look what they've done in our backyard, finish the job, Mr. President. We're ready to pay the price. I think for most, it's more likely to be the former message. And I think they also look at this and they say, do we really want Iran totally taken out of the equation? And do we really want a situation where Israeli domination is further entrenched? And as I said, we all have to accept that, deeply unpopular with the peoples of the region. Part of the answer to that question, Ashfaq, I would argue, is a question of timing, okay? How durable is the Iranian response capacity? How long can Iran sustain an ability to be disruptive, to not make this easy? Are there things that we've not yet seen from Iran that we may see in the coming days or weeks if it takes that long? And how does that stack up against American resilience and durability? How long can Trump allow this to go on? Does America pay a serious price? How popular or unpopular will this be at home? And some of those questions are not defined. In fact, many of them are not defined in the first 12, 24 hours. Those are defined over the course of days, and the capacity to generate attrition. And what is that? It's not so much a balance of escalation, it's a balance of capacity to respond and sustain.
Excellent. Daniel Levy, thank you so much for your time and for also enduring some of our technical glitches and problems. And
I'm back.
Have a good Saturday.
I can hear you, Matilda.
Yeah, Matilda.
If my mic was working, well, thank you. And that gives me an opportunity to thank you as well, Daniel. That was really, really, really fascinating. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Daniel.
Now, our next guest
that
we have lined up. Thanks, Asha. Yeah, I've been silenced for too long by my own technical mishaps. We're about to be joined by MEE's US correspondent, Sean Matthews. Sean, welcome to our live stream. You're pretty familiar, I'm sure, with what's going down. Could you just give us a layout of the military situation right now? I mean, we've seen this. It may be a surprise that this is happening now, but it's not a surprise that it's happening at all. We've seen a build-up of US military resources in the region over the last month, and also, you know, Iran's military situation. Is the US-Israeli coalition a military might that Iran can stand up to? What is the military layout of the scenario right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I mean, yes, so Trump has assembled basically the biggest U.S. force posture in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And obviously, the week that we're going by, there's a lot of speculation. Was he going to use those forces? Were they just a negotiating tactic? Obviously, he's answered everyone's question, which I think our reporting was pointing towards the fact that he was preparing to strike. So, as the previous guest was saying, basically, it's a war right now between U.S. strikes trying to take out U.S. and Israeli strikes trying to take out Iran's senior leadership, hit those ballistic missile launch pads. They're targeting basically all the institutions of the Iranian state to get it to crumble. And the Iranians are firing back with their ballistic missile arsenal. I think one of the things that stands out to me almost immediately is just the speed and the ferocity of the Iranian strikes on the Gulf region. Remember, during the 2025 June 12-day war, Iran didn't really strike the Gulf. They had one, strike against Al Udeid and Qatar, and that was done very, choreographed and telegraphed after the U.S. strikes on those 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. But the Iranians were at pains not to drag the Gulf into the last war. And this time, within an hour, they responded, hitting Abu Dhabi. They were striking. There were strikes on Kuwait. Reports of explosions in Riyadh. And then obviously we have a confirmation. I think this is the only confirmation so far that the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was struck and hit. The Bahrainis confirmed that. So Iran's, really the ferocity at which the Iranians responded hitting the Gulf stands out to me with their ballistic missiles.
Now, at the center of the justification given for these strikes is the nuclear situation in Iran. Trump has claimed for a long time that Iran is building up a nuclear weapons capacity. Iran denies that its nuclear capacity is for anything other than peaceful regions. We also thought in June that, or Trump told us in June, that they had destroyed Iran's nuclear capacity. Now it's such an imminent threat that they have to launch the offensive we're witnessing at the moment. Before I get your immediate thoughts, we want to play this clip from the Omani foreign minister, because it was just last night that we learned from diplomats involved in negotiations that the nuclear diplomatic agreement process between Iran and US was actually making pretty good headway. Let's hear what he had to say. Do we have that clip? Do we have that clip to play? Quick fire to our producers. One moment. Well, we'll play that clip, I think, then in a second. Sean,
material, that things that could be used as nuclear fuel for a bomb. You're saying Iran would not keep on their own soil?
They would give it up.
They would give it up?
They will not be able to actually accumulate that material that will enable them to create a bomb. There's no accumulation. So there will be zero accumulation, zero stockpiling, and full verification. That is also equally important achievement, I think. A full and comprehensive verification by the IAEA, which is the agency in charge of this file.
The UN nuclear watchdog.
That's right.
So you're saying all enriched material would be shipped someplace else, not Russia, but...
No, the current stockpiles that still exist.
The things that are still in Iran.
I think that there is agreement now that this will be downblended to the lowest level possible,
okay,
to a neutral level, a natural level, which means, and converted into fuel, and that fuel will be irreversible.
Okay, well, we just heard there that Iran does not in any way have the capacity to develop the nuclear weapons. And this is the latest tweet as well. It says, "I am dismayed. Active and serious negotiations have yet again been undermined." This is from the same man that we just saw speaking. He said, "Neither the interests of the United States nor the cause of global peace are well served by this. And I pray for the innocents who will suffer. I urge the United States not to get sucked in further. This is not your war." Sean, your reflections.
Yeah, I mean, I think I watched that interview on CBS with Foreign Minister al-Busaydi. What stood out to me when I was watching it previously, it was just the urgency in his voice. I mean, this really did strike me as a last-ditch attempt by the Omanis to kind of prevent this war, which a lot of people in the Gulf saw coming. I was told by one source in the Gulf that the country not to be named, there was an event that was scheduled for Friday with local senior regional officials, and that event was rescheduled to a Thursday evening because clearly a lot of the Gulf states, they knew this was coming. So al-Busaydi went on CBS. He really made this last-ditch attempt to try to talk to the American people, to talk to Trump directly, I think, through television, and to get him to forestall an attack. And I think in his voice, you kind of heard that. He tried to strike a confident tone there and say that, we were making progress, but he seemed to be searching for excuses, right, to try to forestall this attack. And I think the Omanis were making good progress. I mean, the great irony of all of this, and we reported it this week, is that Trump is not only contradicting the Omanis by saying that Iran's nuclear program poses a threat, he's contradicting his own statements, right? Back in June 2025, he says he obliterated Iran's nuclear program, right? They struck 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Even Trump's Pentagon, which contradicted his claim of total obliteration, said that Iran's nuclear program had been set back by up to 2 years. So there was no urgency, even if with Trump's rationale, there was no urgency to kind of strike within a week or 2 weeks, even going by the United States' own public statements. So I think that's the great irony here, right? Is that Trump is not even trying to sell this, I think, as a war on the nuclear program. I mean, nothing's really been done to convince the American people of that.
Talk to us about the American people here, actually, because it seems politically a strange move for Trump to make, given that he came in on this campaign pledge to end forever wars. We have seen in Trump's speech and his rhetoric that he's trying to position himself here as a defeater of Iranian, quote, terrorism, of the nuclear threat in the region. You've addressed that. Also as a hero of the Iranian people. But there is a huge part of his base who we anticipate will be very, very frustrated about this launching of US into a situation that could turn out to be very, very protracted, has already been quite protracted. Inside the US, do you predict there to be a backlash against Donald Trump politically? Or could it play in his favor? Could his self-aggrandizing rhetoric play out?
I think what Trump is hoping for is some kind of an easy win like he had in Venezuela, right? This has been discussed, and he thinks he can sell that to his base as a victory. But Trump's speech, he did not even lay the groundwork for an easy victory. What he said in his speech was that he was prepared for American service members, soldiers, to die. Something along the lines, I don't remember the exact words, but in his video that was released, he said something like, there's a chance that U.S. soldiers could be put in harm's way and they could die. So Trump appears to be acknowledging that he's willing to risk American lives to go to war with Iran for regime change, right? The president who campaigned against regime change. I think the other thing that's notable is that, just the circular, the logic that the Trump administration was using to justify this war. If it's not the nuclear program, they were discussing the ballistic missile threat, so-called ballistic missile threat. Trump, in his State of the Union address, he said that the U.S. was going to attack Iran's ballistic, had to deal with Iran's ballistic missile program to defend Europe. This is the president who said that Europe needs to take its own security at heart. He's kind of questioned about downsizing the NATO alliance. So that stood out to me too, is that why is the U.S. going to war with Iran to defend Europe from Iranian ballistic missiles?
If it's about ballistic missiles, we know who is very afraid of the threat of Iranian ballistic missiles, and that is Israel.
Of course, and it's a top priority. Yeah, that is the Israeli goal, right? But I think basically what we have seen at this stage is that for Trump, and this is what I was told from former senior U.S. officials who were in touch with members of the administration a while ago. The calculation within the Trump administration is that Iran is ripe for regime change. And I think Trump wants to be the president that delivers that. He wants to upset the status quo. Mm-hmm. And people in U.S. government who are, adjacent to these conversations, former senior officials will say that for the last 3 weeks, the Trump administration has been assessing that they think that they can, overthrow the Islamic Republic. And Trump thinks that he can set up some massive victory in the Middle East by doing that. And I think that's what he wants to sell to the American people. I don't think his voters will agree to it. We saw, Tucker Carlson, kind of the right-wing podcaster, who was very against foreign intervention. He made a last-ditch attempt to go to the White House also recently. He met with President Donald Trump. A lot of people saw him, as trying to discourage Trump from starting this war. And notably, al-Busaydi himself, before he went on CBS, he met with J.D. Vance, who is kind of seen as, one of the biggest opponents of foreign intervention. Remember during that Signal Gate chat? Yeah. When the U.S. officials were discussing whether they should bomb the Houthis or not, it was
they were doing so in Yemen, and it was all made public. Yeah.
Yeah, and Vance was the one official who was saying, I don't know if intervening in Yemen fits with the president's position on foreign intervention. I don't think this is a good idea. So we know that Vance is a skeptic of that, and I don't think it's ironic that the Omanis went and met with Vance yesterday. So yes, I think Trump's base is very much against this. I've already seen some statements from Democratic lawmakers saying that Trump is obviously, pulling the U.S. into a new war, the so-called anti-war president. And of course, the bigger issue is that none of this was ever put before the American people, for a vote in Congress even. So no lawmakers are even on the record about this foreign intervention, which I find, remarkable.
I think like the constitutional situation here in America is a very relevant one. And also if we're talking about the peculiarities of the timing of this strike, just yesterday, Congress was moving to block strikes on Iran. And this morning we wake up to hear that Trump has launched strikes on Iran. What is the dynamic here, constitutionally? What does this say about the checks and balances in place within the US government and the threats to democracy and to democratic structures inside America right now?
No, for sure. Look, I think unfortunately, and a lot of the viewers might see this, there really hasn't been a debate about the war at all. And even the kind of efforts that we saw to get a vote on the war, they weren't that strong on the Republican or Democratic side, even the Democratic side especially, I think. Basically, what Trump is going to do is kind of float under the war powers resolution that he can carry out strikes. He has within 60 days to do that. So if he thinks he can do strikes for 2 weeks and collapse the Iranian regime, he'll continue that. But this is just part of a pattern, I think, that we have seen of the Congress not being consulted on matters of war. And to be fair, members of Congress, I think, they have pulled away from that themselves, right? They don't want to be on the record. So it's much easier, if you think about it, it's much easier for lawmakers who are either pro or anti-war to campaign on that issue and not take a stake, with the vote. Because if it's a success, they can claim it as a success to their voters, or they can spin it that way, however they deem a success. And if it's a failure, obviously, then they can run on that. So I think that is interesting, that Congress themselves really doesn't want to take ownership of any of these issues.
So do you think that they won't maneuver now as planned to obstruct the war that has already begun in Iran?
No, I mean, I don't see. Maybe you'll see an effort from a few of the Democrats, like Ro Khanna, Rashida Tlaib would come to mind, maybe. And the Republican side, Thomas Massie or Rand Paul. But other than that, I mean, you can count them literally on one hand, right? The Republicans and Dems who would do that.
Right. Well, Sean Matthews, thank you so much for joining us on this special coverage of the strikes on Iran. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, for anyone joining, this is our coverage of strikes on Iran. US President Donald Trump has begun, in his words, a major combat operations in Iran after Israel also said that it had launched missile attacks against the country. We'll be joined in a second by our reporter Tamara Himani to bring the latest updates. And then we'll be going over to our bureau chief in Jerusalem to find out what is happening in Israel as well. Tamara, welcome back. Tell us the latest news about the situation in Iran.
So yeah, as I mentioned, obviously we're seeing massive strikes across Iran. The death toll from the strike on the elementary school continues to climb. And Iran's foreign minister has said that Iran will undertake actions against US bases across the region in line with what it calls its right to self-defense against this joint US-Israeli attack. We know that several senior political figures have had their residences targeted. So we're looking at the presidential palace, Ayatollah Khamenei's compound, former President Ahmadinejad as well. So at the moment, we're also seeing statements coming in from the Gulf countries, from US allies. So Saudi Arabia saying that they will join the US in operations against Iran after the attacking of air bases. It has condemned and denounced what it calls blatant Iranian aggression and violation of the sovereignty of the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan. So I think it's quite interesting here Iran's gamble has been that by attacking these bases in these states, they would pressure President Trump to end this campaign. But an alternative consequence, of course, is that they could, in fact, lift restrictions for the US to use their airspace and these bases to attack Iran if they feel that their own sovereignty is under threat, which is what we're seeing at the moment. So yeah, a lot of reactions coming in as we're speaking.
Tamara, thank you so much for that update. Now we will be joined by Lubna Masarwa, who is journalist and Middle East Eye's Palestine and Israel bureau chief, because of course the strikes initially came from Israel, and now Israel is under a sort of emergency lockdown situation. Lubna, can you just tell us what is happening in Jerusalem and what is the sentiment among the population?
Well, I actually woke up this morning in Tel Aviv, and there was a massive sirens all around the city. Of course, there's a control in the phone, so we could hear it in the phone. I can say that there's rockets in all the country, and it didn't stop. Over 30 rockets, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, south and north. I witnessed many families mostly running away from Tel Aviv this morning with their children, suitcases, and leaving out. And we don't know yet what to expect coming in the next period. Actually, I can say that this war had a widespread support also from the political level. And when I say political level, I also consider opposition, coalition, left, right wing, and also among Israeli public.
So, I mean, the Israeli public by now have become quite war. They have faced a lot of situations like this over recent years from a government that has waged wars on several fronts. But you're saying that generally popular sentiment is in favor of these strikes on attack. Of these attacks on Iran. People in Israel aren't becoming tired of this situation.
Well, it can be confusing, but like the Israeli population had got used to war, and war had become a policy. The past, like 8 months ago in June, Netanyahu declared a total victory with Iran, and we thought it's already behind us, but now it's a new promises of victory. The Israeli society, like if you speak to random Israelis in the streets, it's a bit how to say, like ironic, because a majority think that by this war Israel going to free the Iranian people, the Iranian women from hijab, and this is like one of the journalists described it as a mandatory war. Even though there is 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza living under genocide and apartheid, and no one are aiming to free them.
So Israel is moving to free the Iranian people, but the Palestinian people remain under occupation in Israeli occupied territory.
Yeah, this is the irony of hearing Israelis talking about freeing the Iranian people from the regime, and actually. This is one of the main goals the Israeli cabinet put for this war, is to finish the regime, to change the regime, as well the police, and this will make it more complicated.
But does it stop with Iran? Israel has described these attacks on Iran, I should say, as preemptive, as a sort of preemptive self-defense, indicating that their intelligence is that Iran was going to attack Israel if they did not attack. We've heard now from many guests in the know that actually that this attack has been planned for a long time, and it's been planned alongside negotiations between US and Iran to reach a diplomatic situation. And so I suppose the question mark there is what are the Israeli government's true intentions with these airstrikes on Iran? Is it just Iran, and just how far had they set their sights? Because if it was total victory in June last year, but we're seeing now more aggression, well, what exactly does total victory look like in the Israeli government's mind?
You ask me, I don't believe, and I don't think Israel want victory. Israel want to be in forever war, and always they will look for a new enemy. Just a few days ago, Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, said that Turkey is the new enemy, as well as Netanyahu. They're speaking about the Sunni line, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and speaking about the nuclear of Pakistan. So there is a new policy by Israel. There's zero diplomacy after October 7, and this is an open war that I don't think it will end. The existence of Israel, I believe, is built in having and creating a new enemy. And to see today how actually, like, journal, even Haaretz, the way the title, the address started, like the front page of like, this is a preemptive war, like we just reacting in case they will attack us. So there is a total support for this war in Israel among society, among journalists, among politicians, everyone. This is like, and this is actually symbolize how this war became part of the society here.
Something I picked up on during Donald Trump's speech about these strikes. He brought up October 7th, the Hamas-led October 7th attack on Israel, and how Iran has a role in providing Hamas with its military provisions. And so in Trump's speech, he essentially tied back the attacks we're seeing now to October 7th, which is something that we have seen done again and again with Israeli regional attacks, not just beyond the, by far disproportionate reaction against Gaza that has been deemed a genocide by many human rights organizations in the US, but in their attacks against Lebanon, in their attacks against Syria, again and again, we heard it being tied back to October 7th. And I wonder, do you think that is a deliberate strategy, and B, is that a strategy that works? Do people continue to buy this idea that this attack, this aggression by the Israeli government is justified by what happened on October 7th, 2023?
I think Israel changed dramatically after the October 7, changed from like diplomacy or light diplomacy to show power and supremacy also in the Middle East. At the moment, the Israeli public Israeli elite talking about the greatest Israel, about occupation of parts of Syria and Lebanon and other areas. And you even hear about occupation parts from Saudi Arabia, from some right-wing groups. I don't think this is all because of October 7. I believe there was plans before the genocide began, and now it's a good opportunity for Israel to go ahead with its plans. Is that going to succeed? I don't know. I doubt. Israel isolated itself also in the Middle East. I can see now more countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia are worried of Israel expanding and also isolating the Emiratis over the support they're giving to Israel.
And if we are to understand these attacks, these Israeli and US-led attacks on Iran, as being within the context of of plans for a greater Israel, will you just territorially lay out for us what that greater Israel looks like?
First of all, I also want to mark that this is big. This is the first time it's a US and Israeli joint war. Like in the past, the US will start a war or Israel will start a war and the US will join. And this is the first time since the history of Israel that the US and Israel going ahead with a war, and it will have implications in the Middle East. But Matilda, I think what is important now to highlight is the situation in Palestine, the situation in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank. And I think we have to keep an eye. Like this morning, there was a strike in Gaza. The question now is Israel using this war also to, escape the second stage of Gaza, and what's going to be. There's a big annexation taking place in the West Bank, confiscating of lands, raids, building settlements, and we have to also look at this side.
And what would it mean for the situation for Palestinians if we are to see, as a result of these strikes, regional destabilization, the collapse of governance in Iran and potentially far more strength given to Israel, more dominance given to Israel in the wider region? What could the consequences of that be for Palestinians?
To be honest, it's a bit too much for me to address this question at the moment.
I understand. Lubna Masarwa, thank you so much for your time today on Middle East Eye and for all of your reporting on this situation. Now, for anyone joining us, we have been covering, of course, the US and Israeli joint strikes on Iran, which Trump has categorized as major combat operations. It's clear that this does not resemble the June attacks that we saw last year. This is looking to be a far more comprehensive, destructive operation, and the fallout is something that many people have raised concerns about, including the lineup of guests that we've been hearing from. We will be joined by Tamara Himani, our reporter, in a second to bring the latest updates. But just to recap some of what we've heard, we heard earlier on the show from our editor-in-chief, David Hurst, who pointed to the fact that there are two different wars going to be fought here, that the US only stand to win if this is a very, very quick victory as they achieved in Venezuela, whereas Iran will be working to wear down the US operation, because politically the fallback for Trump is likely to become more and more difficult the longer that this conflict goes on. We heard from Daniel Levy as well, president of the US Middle East Project, who basically said, look, this has nothing to do with the development of nuclear weapons in Iran. As Trump says it is. We have heard from diplomats involved in those negotiations that diplomatic negotiations were going well and that Iran was nowhere near the capacity of threat that Trump was characterizing. Tamara, can you just tell us the latest situation? And of course, feel free to bring any reflections that you have on what we've been hearing from our guests up to this point.
Sure, yeah. As you mentioned, there's a real tension here between the kind of like quick gain that Trump is looking for, you know, a June 2025 style operation, as in the 12-day war, a Venezuela style operation, versus, you know, the prolonged engagements that a regime change operation would require. And, you know, it's very likely that this could develop into a region-wide war of attrition. We've seen several waves of strikes from Iran on US military bases in the Gulf, multiple countries in the Gulf, which have now said that they are willing to support the US operation against Iran because of these strikes violating their sovereignty. So again, we're looking at the potential regionalization of this war. The US and Israel have said that they're only getting started, that they have scores of targets, political, military, strategic, and otherwise. So again, you have kind of both parties here saying we are willing to go as long as is needed. And, you know, it's a question of, will Trump feel restrained by his voters at home, by his allies in the region? Will Iran's leadership feel that it cannot sustain this conflict for a long time? Again, you know, they've prepared for this extensively. As Andreas Krieg mentioned, they've localized chains of command. You saw a very quick response to the initial US strike, not at all kind of the delayed, choreographed strike that we saw on Qatar in June. And we know that, you know, these senior figures who are being targeted have set out lines of succession in the event that they are killed. We know that obviously Israel carried out very successful decapitation strikes in terms of eliminating several senior commanders last June, but these organizations are extremely resilient. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Iranian military more generally, and they have prepared for the eventuality that they could lose several commanders and so are ready to continue. So where things go from here, how widespread it gets, really depends on what we see in the next few days.
Absolutely. And now there is another sort of layer to the situation right now, which we haven't quite touched on, but we will be getting to more later on the show, which is the situation for the Iranian population. Now, the underlying context here is, of course, the January uprisings, which was possibly the closest that the Iranian population have come to really turning the dial on the government in Iran, but they were met with a brutal crackdown. And many people in Iran were, not everybody, but some people in Iran were certainly calling for external intervention to support the protesters at that time. Trump promised help is coming. We heard from Iranian protesters that gave some of them the courage to go out on the streets, and then, well, no help came, and the fatalities as a result of the government crackdown were in the thousands, and impossible.
And we've heard that language again, yeah, with both Netanyahu and Trump staying in their video statements that kind of, this is the time for you to take over government, to take destiny in your own hands. And
Trump has directly called on people, you know, this is your one shot. Not just that, actually, Mossad has set up a Telegram chat inside Iranians. This is a very crucial channel of communication under internet blackout in Iran. Set up we've just lost Mohammed, our colleague. I was hoping to get his view on this, so hopefully he'll be brought back in. Yeah, Mo, welcome. I was about to bring you into the discussion. So Mossad has set up a Telegram chat as well, calling on Iranians to coordinate their protest. But the geopolitical situation, clearly there are a lot of different forces in play, and there is a risk that Iranian people are being used as a pawn in the scenario, which is not to say that this is, I think that there is going to be a lot of mixed emotion among the Iranian diaspora and the Iranian population in Iran. But it's very important to remember that they're at the center of this situation. Mohammed,
yeah, thank you, Matilda. There was a development, if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow, a strike that I saw, I believe, on an elementary school in Iran. Has that been confirmed?
Yeah, there are. It does look, we're seeing like a death toll in the 40 to 50. Iran state media is reporting on a girls' elementary school.
And what about world leaders? Have we seen any statements?
We've seen from the EU just a statement that doesn't really reference international law. Obviously, we've seen phrases like perilous and concerned, but beyond that, we haven't seen very forceful condemnations. The most forceful condemnations we've seen are from states within the region whose territory has been attacked by Iranian strikes. But in general, we haven't seen a kind of forceful condemnation of Trump's actions. And I think it's quite similar to the situation after Venezuela, where kind of the EU and other US allies feel that the most they can do without antagonizing the president is to express concern and then to kind of wait and see how the situation plays out. But I think, a real soft-spokenness from US allies and a real kind of sense of inevitability of these strikes and taking a back seat kind of where these discussions are concerned.
And just to remind our viewers, I do believe we have a Trump clip to play back in terms of his speech right before the strikes, when he authorized it.
The military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces and no longer use their IEDs or roadside bombs, as they are sometimes called, to so gravely wound and kill thousands and thousands of people, including many Americans. And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or in the alternative, face certain death. So, lay down your arms, you will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations.
You just heard here that was Donald Trump talking about the U.S. authorizing strikes on Iran. We are now joined by Dr. Ofer Kassif. He's a member of the Israeli Knesset representing the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, Hadash. Dr. Kassif, welcome to the show. Let me just get your... Absolutely, sir. Let me just start off with getting your reaction to everything that's happening today.
Look, Trump in a video message, I didn't follow the one you just broadcasted, so I don't know if it was mentioned there, but in a message before, in a video message, Trump declared that there were two goals of this massive attack, as he called it, on Iran. First, the destruction of Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities, and second, regime change in Iran. I would like, with your permission, assuming we have enough time, to analyze each and one of those two phony declarations. So first,
absolutely, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
As far as the first goal is concerned, the goal that President Trump declared, that is to say the destruction of Iran's capabilities, nuclear and missile capabilities. Someone once said that it is insanity to repeat the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. By the way, it wasn't Einstein. It's a myth that Einstein said that. But the saying still holds, is still valid. Now, I remind everyone that on June 25th, 2025, Netanyahu declared, and I quote, I'm quoting him word by word. It was exactly 25th of June, 2025. Netanyahu said the following: "We achieved a historic victory. We removed the nuclear and missile threat. We eliminated Iran's nuclear project and its missile industry." End quote. Now, either he lied then, because now he says, with his companion Trump, they say that there are still such capabilities. So what happened 8 months ago? They lied. So either they lied then, especially Netanyahu, or they're lying now. Now, I believe both, because first of all, I have to say that if they didn't succeed then in removing or destroying those capabilities of Iran's, the nuclear and the missile industry, why should they succeed now? What's the difference? Now, every rational person knows that there is no military way to stop Iran's nuclear project, but only a diplomatic, political one. There was such an agreement in the past. I want everybody to remember. There was an agreement that the Iranians adhered to. I want to quote again someone, Professor Yitzhak Ben Israel. He was the chairman of the Israeli Space Agency. And he said, not too long ago, in an interview on one of the channels in Israel television, that once the agreement then was signed, and I quote him, "The Iranians did not deviate from it even by a millimeter." I repeat the quotation by this Professor Ben Israel. I repeat.
And I want to add, Dr. Kassif, go ahead, finish your point.
The Iranians did not deviate from the agreement even by a millimeter. It was Netanyahu who led Trump to withdraw from the agreement. This is what led to today's circumstances.
And let me add one more thing, Dr. Kassif.
If I may just finish this sentence with your permission. So,
please.
The withdrawal of Trump, because to a great extent of Netanyahu's pressure for this agreement with Iran, that brought us all to the current position, which harms us all, the Iranians, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the entire region, and probably beyond. That's insanity. Now,
okay, but that takes me to another question, Dr. Kassif, about the consensus on the ground, the consensus inside Israel today. I mean, are Israelis happy about this, or are they ready to bear the brunt of what is happening today? What is the consensus on the ground from where you are?
Look, I got used to be isolated relatively with my comrades. Unfortunately, we are yet again. It's not the first time, and I'm afraid it's not the last time. But as it was proved before that we were right, I'm afraid that we are going to be proven to be right in the future again. The question is how much blood is going to spill before, of Israelis, of Iranians, of Palestinians, of other peoples, of Americans. We don't want anyone to be harmed. I want to be very clear. We already been accused after my party, the Communist Party in Hadash, the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, which is a Jewish-Palestinian partnership in Israel, the only parliamentarian movement of Jews and Palestinians together. We were already accused today, not too long, a few hours ago. We've been accused by a journalist as if we supported the Iranian regime. No, we do not. I want to be very, very clear. The Iranian regime is an oppressive and murderous regime. We stand with the Iranian people. We want this regime to disappear, but it is up to the Iranian people to struggle against their own oppressive regime.
I mean,
it's not
Trump and Netanyahu are making the case that these strikes are actually helping the Iranian people, or the goal of it is to help the Iranian people.
Neither the United States nor Israel are interested in the well-being of the Iranian people, by the way, not even of their own people. The arch enemy of the Americans is the Trump's administration, and the arch enemy of the Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, and others alike, is Netanyahu's government. We have to be very clear about it. The United States never cared for the well-being and lives of neither nation in the world. We remember Operación Condor in Latin America 50 years ago and 40 years ago. They brought military fascist juntas who murdered thousands and thousands of people in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Chile, in other places. Of course, we remember Vietnam, we remember Korea, we remember many other places. Did the United States, different administrations, Democrats as well as Republicans, did they do anything in order to save the peoples of, say, Argentina or Chile? No, they didn't care about them. They cared only about power and economic interests, mainly, you know, depends where, but the oil or insurance companies, etc., the big capital. Right. Same here. Neither Netanyahu nor Trump care about the well-being of the Iranians. This is a lip service. This is a sham. They care about their own power, economically speaking and politically speaking.
And on that, Dr.
Kassim, and if I may, there's no.
I just have one more question I would like to ask you before the time runs out.
But just last sentence before, if you allow me, that there is no chance. Everybody knows there is no chance of removing this regime by military means. Everybody knows that. And if I may, just you tell me if I can, if I have the time. You know,
I have one more question, Dr. Kassim. Yeah, sure. One more question, because we are running out of time here. But based on what you were saying right now, that this is not in the interest of helping the Iranian people in terms of Netanyahu's and Trump's goals. How can we see this through the prism of Greater Israel, right? The expansion of Israel in the region. I mean, this is something that we've been hearing many Israeli officials talk about. We've heard the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, speak about not too long ago. How do we see what's happening today through the prism of Greater Israel?
Unfortunately, the Israeli government and the great deal of the Israeli society, of course, not all of the Israeli society, not even the majority, but a very vocal and powerful minority, given the power of the government and the assistance of the government within the Israeli society itself, there is now an epoch of Messianic amok. And this influences many different layers and different streams within the Israeli society. And that has a lot to do with this kind of, you know, the Greater Israel, which is a messianic nightmare. For them, it might be a dream, but it is a nightmare on the ground. I just want everybody to remember that the terrible criminal massacre committed on 7th October 2023 by Hamas is still conceived by many within the Israeli society, including ministers in Netanyahu's government, who said that very explicitly. It's not my interpretation. They were very explicit in saying this is a miracle. They see even this massacre for them is a miracle because it allows them, or signifies, according to them, the coming of the Messiah and the Greater Israel. Of course, we oppose it, first and foremost, because it's morally wrong for everybody, including and mainly for the Palestinian people who deserve their own statehood. We support the two-state solution. The Palestinians must be liberated from the occupation, from genocide, from ethnic cleansing, and form their own independent sovereign state in all territories Israel occupied in 1967. Of course, the Greater Israel is first and foremost morally
wrong. Just have a few seconds, Dr. Kassim, a few seconds.
Also dangerous.
Dr. Ofer Kassim, member of the Israeli Knesset representing the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, Hadash. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, Dr. Kassim. That was Dr. Ofer Kassim, and I believe we have another guest coming up, Alan Iyer, who's the former State Department senior policymaker for Iran and Middle East and North Africa. Alan Iyer, thank you so much for coming on the show. Oh, I just want to give a hint to our producer. I'm unable to hear Mr. Allen here. Just to make sure. Can you hear me, sir? You can hear me. Okay. So just giving a note. Oh, is he muted? Oh, it looks like we've lost Alan, but I'm sure we're going to be bringing him up right away. Could have been just like a technical difficulty. But we were just, I was just speaking to Dr. Alfred Kassif here about the significance of these strikes. Oh, Mr. Allen, you are back. Can you hear me now? Oh, I still cannot hear you, unfortunately. Can you unmute? Is it possibly that you're muted? It's the, you know, the marvel of live television or live YouTube at this point. Are you able to unmute? Yeah, just 1 second. Go ahead. No problem. Should we bring Tamara in while we fix the situation? We are just waiting here for Alan Iyer. Tamara, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
All right. Hit me with the latest lines.
So we're getting more condemnations coming in from regional allies, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and so on, saying that they're ready to support this effort. We're seeing again successive waves of Iranian strikes on cities in Israel, from where our Jerusalem correspondent Lubna Masarwa was speaking, Haifa, Tel Aviv, and so on. We know so far in terms of casualties in the region, we've seen one civilian in the United Arab Emirates killed, one at least from falling debris. And in Iran, the death toll is unknown, but it's still climbing. We've seen an attack on an elementary girls' school, which is thought to have killed around 40 to 50 people. It's unclear how that would have been a target, why that would have been a target. Compared with the rest of the strikes, which are seen to be political or military targets. So we're waiting for more news on that. But yes, Iran's state media is reporting a high death toll, and we're also seeing quite terrifying images of charred buildings and vehicles. As for
Tamara, can I ask you what were Netanyahu's latest lines? I believe he had a speech not long ago.
Netanyahu had told, he had kind of addressed partly the Iranian people and said, kind of, it's time for you to take your destiny into your own hands. Whether that helps them to do so, I think very much a matter of debate. But I'm sure our guest, Alan Ayer, can speak to that and so much more. Thank you, Alan, for being here.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. Alan, you're here. You're here, Alan. You made it. Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Not a problem, sir. Thank you. Welcome to the show. I guess let me just start off getting. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to correct before you started. You interviewed me as the senior policymaker on Iran. I was a senior diplomat working on Iran for many years, to include as part of the nuclear negotiations. But I wouldn't want to claim that I was the senior U.S. diplomat.
Oh, a senior policymaker for Iran in the MENA region. But we're cool on the former State Department official, however.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. All right, Alan, let me just get your reaction to what's been happening today.
While it's not unexpected, I think it's still unfortunate. There was no, despite what President Trump said, there was no imminent threat from Iran. And so if that's the proximate cause of the rationale for this attack, which is illegal by U.S. law and violates international law, then it wasn't necessary. It wasn't a preventative attack to deter an imminent threat. But in President Trump's statement, he makes clear that his real reason is regime change. He's trying to topple this regime in the hopes that the Iranian people put in a new and better one. Those are long odds. So again, obviously a lot of military planning went into this, and given the disparate strengths of the three militaries, the U.S. has $1 trillion military budget. Israel has a strong military. Iran's conventional military is not that strong. It relies on deterrence on its missiles. So there's no doubt that we will be able to achieve military goals.
There's a lot to unpack into what you just said, but one of the things that we've been seeing shared quite heavily online was an interview that Oman's foreign minister gave to, I believe, CBS, talking about that there was a deal on the table, basically pleading with the U.S. to avoid everything we are seeing unfold right now. But let me read you a tweet by Badr al-Busaidi, who's Oman's foreign minister, which he tweeted just a few minutes ago. And if the producer has it, we can also put it up full screen here. But he says, quote, "I am dismayed. Active and serious negotiations have yet again been undermined. Neither the interests of the U.S. nor the cause of global peace are well served by this. And I pray for the innocents who will suffer. I urge the U.S. not to suck in further. This is not your war." End quote. How do you react, Alan?
Two reactions. One, to say it's undermined is an understatement. Opportunity for future negotiations are gone. They no longer exist. But also the Omani foreign minister, I think, was incorrect in saying that there was a deal on the table. There wasn't a deal on the table. And in fact, serious negotiations between Iran and the Trump negotiation, serious sustained negotiations never took place, not since President Trump came to power. There were desultory, intermittent discussions with no real progress because of the vast distance between the U.S. red lines and the Iranian deadlines. So I understand the Omani foreign minister trying to stave off the threat of war by saying that the two sides were close to a deal, but in fact the two sides were not close to a deal at all.
Well, okay, let me unpack that with you, because if we weren't close to a deal, then what is the point of negotiations in your view?
I'm saying we never had real negotiations. We had intermittent, desultory discussions. The point of negotiations is to deal with a matter of contention between two sovereign states, as was shown, for example, in the Obama-era negotiations between Iran and the P5+1 that resulted in the JCPOA. That type of negotiations didn't happen this time around. The Trump administration tried a more stripped down version that was not successful. But basically what happened was that President Trump and his administration presented a series of demands to Iran. So it was more seeking Iran's capitulation, as Steve Witkoff said in a recent interview, than actual back and forth negotiations where both sides compromise. And Iran was not willing to take the U.S. red lines, which is no indigenous enrichment of Iranian soil, because, among other reasons, Iran assumed that the real U.S. goal, in conjunction with Israel, was regime change.
Well, let me ask you another question, maybe for historical context. Why did the Biden administration refuse to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal when Biden was sworn in?
The situation had changed from the time when Biden was sworn in. President Trump had pulled out of the JCPOA in November 2018. So it wasn't just a question of saying, we want to go back. He had a lot of, I think, pressure on him to make what's called a longer and stronger JCPOA than the one that President Trump had ripped up in 2018. So he set his negotiators in the State Department to try to get a JCPOA plus type deal with Iran. But because it was not an administration priority, and because Iran had already seen one U.S. president unilaterally pull out of a deal, even though Iran was in full compliance with it, he was not able to negotiate a longer and stronger JCPOA.
And what do you make of Iran's reaction to all of this? And I ask you because obviously both Israel and the U.S. have no control over what happens inside Iran following these actions. So what are they expecting to happen now?
Well, actually, they do. They have a lot of control by destroying Iranians' ability to respond militarily, and that's what they're trying to do now. Iran had said in the lead up to this latest U.S.-Israeli attack that, unlike in previous occasions, were the U.S. to attack, Iran would respond aggressively and not a calibrated, limited, performative response. Iran made it clear, because it was trying to reestablish its vastly degraded strategic deterrence, that if attacked, it will respond against Israel, against U.S. forces in the region, against U.S. bases in the region. And we're seeing that happen now. Now, again, the key question is to what extent the U.S. and Israel, by their military actions, can prevent a substantial Iranian response. So far, we've seen that Iran has, in fact, targeted U.S. allies in the region and U.S. bases in the region, in Qatar and UAE and the Kingdom, Bahrain, but there has not been significant damage yet.
And what about Iran's allies? Do you believe that they could get involved? And I think of the Houthis as an example.
Houthis have already issued a statement saying they're going to resume attacking on shipping. So, yes, it's a question whether, obviously, Hezbollah will try anything against Israel and to what extent Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq will participate in aggressions against U.S. forces.
But there are so many ifs and uncontrollables in the scenario. So how does it pan out in your view? Where do we go from here?
We have no idea. I mean, it would be foolish to predict. Here's what we know. President Trump has rolled the dice on regime change. He's going to, along with Israel, continue strikes. Israel is focusing on decapitating Iranian leadership. The United States is focusing on military targets, missile targets, naval targets. At a certain point, after a couple of days or a week or so, they'll stop in the hopes that the Iranian people will, as President Trump said, take back their country or rise up and finish the job. On its behalf, Iran is going to try to cause a lot of regional pain, enough pain for the military strikes against it to stop. So
more than what we have seen today?
How that calculus plays out, we have no idea.
All right. Well, let me take it on the domestic front in the United States. Where is Trump's base in all of this? That's one question. And there's another part is where's Congress in all of this?
Well, Congress is silent. Congress has not played its constitutional role in terms of presidential actions since President Trump came to power. In terms of domestic support or lack of support, we know that President Trump's domestic popularity, at least according to polls, is at historic lows. There's a number of challenges, both economic and other. I don't think he started this in the hopes that this would boost his popularity domestically. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he actually believes that Iran poses an imminent threat to the U.S., so there's no open source information collaborating that. So it's far more likely that he just wants to deal with the Iranian threat, even though not imminent, once and for all, and take actions that will result in, if not a vastly weakened and incapable Iran, of a best case in Iran that's pro-Western and not a threat in the region.
And is it too early to be even discussing the likelihood of going back to negotiations after what we're seeing unfold?
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
And we'll just leave it right here. Alan Ayer, thank you so much for joining us on MEELive.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Matilda, you are back, but I can't hear you. Matilda obviously has been covering the show since it started, doing a phenomenal job. But let's bring Tamara in to do a quick recap while we fix the technical difficulties. Tamara, how'd you find that interview with Alan?
Very interesting words from Alan there about the sincerity with which the U.S. entered these negotiations to begin with. What did you make of Alan's statements about this whole negotiations process and how the U.S. approached it?
Yeah, I was really interested in what he had to say about the whole idea of forget the negotiations. There's no coming back from this in one way or another. But no, I thought it was very interesting. I was very interested to hear a lot more about Biden's refusal to re-enter the nuclear deal. However, it doesn't seem like it was as deep as I may have believed it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always this debate with President Trump, where is he entering negotiations as a playing for time tactic?
Is it a distraction? Yeah.
Or is he using military action to reach a deal, which obviously seems quite nonsensical to us, but we know that the US president has a very firm view of, keep up the military pressure, and eventually they will, as his envoy Steve Witkoff said, capitulate. So whether that's his expectation, although it seems very unlikely at present. We know that the kind of US strategy that they expect to be pursuing is kind of an escalating series of strikes with off-ramps along the way. This is according to a senior US official who spoke to CNN, saying kind of like each round will take place over 1 to 2 days, and then they'll pause and assess, supposedly to allow Iran's leadership time to respond. So it's quite interesting that they essentially expect this to be a phased attack that increases in intensity until they can get, I suppose, the response they want from Iran's leadership. We know that senior US officials are very frustrated thus far that they haven't gotten that response from Iran, as Steve Witkoff was telling Fox News just last week. But as you know, several guests have discussed, for Iran to give up rights to enrichment and to give up ballistic missiles is seen as kind of a total surrender on the part of the leadership. So I'm not sure how they managed to square that circle. I'm not sure what you think, Mohammed.
Sorry, I missed that last question, Tamara.
I'm saying I'm not sure what you think, whether this is kind of a reasonable demand that the US can just expect to continue to conduct escalating strikes and expect that Iran's leadership will simply acquiesce to their statements. Because from what we've heard from the Oman's foreign minister, as you noted, was that you had a willingness in the works before this attack took place.
Yeah, but you've also heard Alan speak on that Omani foreign minister's statement as well, saying that, you know, he basically saying that the Omani foreign minister believed too much in the fact that there was a negotiation and the fact that there was a deal on the table. Alan believed that there was no deal on the table. So again, your question is, I guess, it's the $1 million question of the day.
I mean, and as you said, you know, Israeli and US officials, they have planned a joint operation requiring this level of coordination for months, is what they've said. They've put in thousands of hours of work. So, you know, the whole time running through these supposed negotiations, we don't know how serious these could be, because we know that this has been planned for months. We know that Iran has also made preparations for months. So whether these negotiations were as serious as Oman's foreign minister indicates, or whether they were just the US playing for time while it figured out an adequate option that would allow it to achieve its aims, I think is very unclear. But certainly whether they can return to negotiations or talks in any serious faith after this has happened twice now, right in the middle of them, I think really casts doubt among any observers that this was anything more than a decoy of sorts.
Tamara, thank you, and really pointing to one of the core questions in this story, which is, of course, the justification given for the war. But right now we have an Iranian journalist joining us to talk about the realities facing people actually at the epicenter of this violence. Nejar Mortazavi is the host of the Iran podcast, and thank you so much, Nejar, for joining us. Look, Iran began its day as normal today. It's now facing strikes from the US and Israel that have not just hit government and military facilities. One strike on a girls' school has caused dozens of casualties. As an Iranian, how are you feeling waking up to this news?
Well, it's our worst nightmare, essentially. I mean, I'm trying to keep myself outside of the story when I'm doing analysis, but at the same time, you know, as any member of the diaspora, we have family and loved ones in the country, constantly trying to get in touch. Internet has disrupted. It's difficult to get through, and also to paint a very clear picture of what's going on. It's a large country, over 90 million population, and listening to the statements of President Trump, US officials, and essentially understanding the goal. It seems like this is all-out war. The president did come out and call it. He called it war. The goal seems to be regime change. I want to reiterate, this is illegal. Congress has not voted on this. U.S. Congress, UN Security Council has not voted on this. The international community didn't have a say. This is just Israel and the U.S. essentially launching a war, illegal war of aggression on Iran and Iranians, because as we saw in June, sort of a prelude to this war past June in the so-called 12-day war, there were a lot of civilian casualties, even though that war was framed as something just targeting the Iranian state, officials and the IRGC and the nuclear sites, etc., we saw that there was a civilian casualty. Over 1,000 Iranians died, most of them civilians. Civilian infrastructure was hit, people's homes were hit, roads, etc. And I expect this to be very much the same, if not much, much worse than that.
Najah, there is, of course, the backdrop to this, which was the protest that swept Iran through January, where there seemed to be sort of rising optimism among many people in Iran who are unhappy with the current government, that they may see a change of government. At the time, Donald Trump told Iranian protesters, help is coming. We heard from some protesters that actually gave them the sort of courage to take to the streets. The word help, of course, has to be interpreted very cynically, coming from Donald Trump in the context of all the attacks that he has waged internationally. But nevertheless, what America and what Israel want is one thing. What Iranians want is another question, and it is probably a more important question. And it is clear that many people in Iran are deeply unhappy with the current government. More than that, have faced deadly violence from the current government. Will Iranian protesters be able to seize this moment, as Trump has called on them to do, and see a change in government that indeed many, many Iranians do want to see?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. Well, first of all, nobody speaks for all Iranians, neither do I, nor any other Iranian who comes on your show, because there are very divergent views. There's a diversity of how, to deal with the situation, even among the, I would say, majority of the population who's very, very unhappy with the status quo at different levels. And then, of course, let's not forget that the regime does have a base of support in the country. So I would say there's a radical base of support for the regime. There's a radical base on the opposite side that wants this regime gone at any cost. But there's also a chunk in the middle, a sort of a gray and mostly silent population. We don't hear so much from them in the media, because inside Iran, the media sort of tries to only focus on the base that supports the current state. And in the diaspora and in the international media scene, we mostly hear from sort of the opposite base who wants the regime gone at every cost. And I think that sort of silent chunk in the middle is not heard and doesn't have that much voice, unfortunately, as much as the other two who have outside voices. I think there's no love lost for the current system, for the status quo, for the way life has been for Iranians economically, politically. Among many in the young generation, we saw women protest in 2022. We saw all kinds of protests with economic sparks, political sparks over the past years, and the grievances have not been addressed. The state of the economy is just deteriorating. But there's no pinning in the political space, etc. But I would caveat that with the fact that foreign military intervention, especially by the US in that region, didn't really bring democracy and better governance and nation building in the past. So I've spoken to a lot of Iranians, both inside Iran and also in the diaspora, who are skeptical of this quote unquote help actually being helpful. I don't think the attacks have anything to do with the well-being of Iranians, of Iranian protesters, of democracy, of freedom. This is about geopolitics. This is Israel seeing Iran as a threat and using the opportunity of Donald Trump to try to eliminate that threat, to try to minimize it first, and then essentially to eliminate that threat. And this is President Trump who I still think he wants a deal with Iran, because if you look at the statements also, they're saying they're going to go in steps and stages, and he's indicated this and implied this in the past, that there may be an opening even after strikes if the Iranians accept his deal and essentially capitulate. And this is something we also heard from the special envoy, that the US wants capitulation on the side of Iran. So I don't think that the Iranians or the form of governance or democracy or freedom is really the issue here, as it hasn't been, it wasn't really, and we didn't see that come, for example, to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Libya, even Syria. We're talking about Syria 10 years ago, with 10 years of civil war. This can be unleashed in Iran. But as far as Iran,
there's a lot of anxiety about the risk, the destabilization risk that could come from this. On the point of the negotiations, though, and the prospects of there still being resolution between the US and Iran, we have heard from Mani Foreign Minister speaking on CBS last night that actually the diplomatic negotiations between the US and Iran were making very, very good headway when this attack happened. And indeed, it seems that there have been plans underway for this attack to happen as the negotiations were ongoing in a way that could be interpreted as quite duplicitous by the US government. So I think there is a big question mark over whether the US is really looking for a diplomatic solution here. Certainly, if they are, this has left a lot of questions unanswered. I have a question also. Trump, as well as calling on the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government, he laid out an ultimatum for the IRGC and for the military and the national security forces in Iran, saying, lay down your weapons and you'll be granted amnesty. But if not, you will face sort of I'm paraphrasing, wrath of the US force. There's a clear threat there, jeopardy there to the Iranian government. If they lose the support of the security forces, then their position becomes much more precarious. Are there any signs of defection within that section of the Iranian governance?
Well, it's too early to tell, but not yet. And we didn't really see that happen in June. In the June war, we didn't see any serious defections. And in fact, even among the population, we saw a rally around the home. I don't like to call it a rally around the flag because I don't think it really bolstered support for the system, the state. But it did that. The war in June, Israeli attack and the U.S. attack, particularly Israeli attack, because they did attack infrastructure, civilian, and they did kill a lot of civilians. The U.S. didn't back then. But that war did create a rally around the homeland. And in fact, it actually didn't bring that kind of a result that the Israelis wanted and had been promoting, that this would be regime change, that they're going to come from the sky and the Iranians are going to rise up and take over from the ground. This time around, I don't know. I think it's still too early to tell. If major defections come, that can change the trajectory, the course of this, or if people decide to protest or rise up as this has been sort of part of the rhetoric. But I haven't seen that yet. And I think this is mostly, it's worrying people. First of all, it's giving a lot of stress and anxiety, as it did in June. I spoke to many Iranians who were around in various cities in June, and it's just the most important sense that they get is horrified and unknown of what's going to happen. Are they be next? Is their home going to be attacked? Is their family going to be attacked? And it's just very, very horrific. And as far as I just wanted to mention about the neighbors, you mentioned the Omani foreign minister, very bold, I would say creative, forward-leaning leap for peace on the eve of this war by the Omani foreign minister. The Omanis have been quiet mediators between Tehran and Washington for years, and he really took a leap and a forward-leaning move, which didn't succeed. But I would say Oman has played a very exemplary role in trying to push for peace, and the neighbors also have been pushing to try to prevent this war, because they understand that this is going to impact others in the neighborhood. It's not going to be just bound to Iranians and Americans or Israelis, and we're already seeing effects of that happening.
Nejat, just a final question, which is, as Iranians face these attacks, is there anything that the international community, in your eyes, should do for the safety and protection of the people in Iran?
Well, I think the international community should use every tool in its toolbox to try to stop the war. I mean, it's still not too late, but unfortunately, we're not seeing that kind of leadership. I was reading the statements coming from European leaders, the European Parliament, the EU, French president, and it's an embarrassment, I think, to the Europeans, this kind of hypocritical or double standard of choosing when to condemn an illegal war depending on who's launching it and who's being attacked. We know the Europeans have been unequivocal in condemning war, for example, when it's launched by Russia against Ukraine. They have been very, they've never held back when they were, for example, saying Israel has the right to defend itself when Israel was attacked. But when Israel attacked Gaza, it's a different story. Israel attacks Lebanon, Israel violates the ceasefire, it's a different story. And now that the US and Israel have attacked Iran. We also don't see that kind of condemnation from them. But I'm hoping at least regional leaders can do a push and play a more constructive role here, and also the international community. I've seen some good comments coming from the United Nations. The UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, on human rights in Iran, had a good statement essentially explaining how this was illegal, this is going to harm civilians, and I think the international community should really step up and try to stop this as soon as possible.
Neja Mortetzavi, thank you so much for joining us today on MEELive.
Thank you for having me.
And that will be our final interview for today. But just to bring you the latest updates before we wrap, early this morning, the US and Israel conducted strikes across Iran in a joint, pre-planned attack targeting military strikes and political leaders. The attack included a strike on a girls' elementary school in Menab, killing dozens of people. Iran immediately responded with strikes on Israel, as well as on US military bases in 5 out of 6 Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Dubai International Airport is closed. Both President Trump of the US and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel have called on Iran's people to take over their government and to take destiny into their own hands. They have signaled that these strikes will last several days and will continue to escalate, with all current and former political leaders on the table. Several Gulf states appear to have come out in support of these attacks after Iran's strikes on their territory. It is unclear how Iran's allied groups across the region will react. The Houthis have said that they'll resume attacks, while Lebanon's Hezbollah and Iraqi militias are yet to act. We have heard over the course of the last few hours that the outcome of this attack could be far wider and far longer than any of those waging it anticipate. So we will be continuing coverage, of course, across Middle East Eye's platforms. You can follow us on social media at Middle East Eye, and you can also go to Middle East Eye's website, where we have a live stream of the events. For now, that is all that we will be covering on this stream. Thank you for tuning in.